Hey, what's up guys? Chris from BS for Build here. In today's episode, we're gonna go over what a good welder is for somebody that's beginning to start welding on cars. If you work on cars a lot, if you wanna do fabrication, you wanna do modifications, eventually you're gonna end up in a spot where you need to weld. And there's a lot of question of what's a good model welder? Should I get MIG or should I get TIG? Or, well, you don't wanna use a stick welder, I'll tell you that right off the bat. So like how to get started, where's a good price point, and all those different things. And that's what we're gonna jump into today. Oh yeah, we don't have an intro for this channel, so I guess I'll just keep going. So we got a couple different types of welders around the shop that we use and some of them we don't use. This is a Miller TIG welder, and this machine cost me about $2,000. I think it was 2,000 bucks on the dot without the gas tank, and that does TIG welding, which I'll jump into in a second. Back here somewhere hiding, man, you really can't see this thing. Over here is a flux core MIG welder. This cost me 50 bucks at a Harbor Freight, there we go, 50 bucks at a Harbor Freight parking lot sale. And then over here is the Vulcan MIG Max, what is this model? 215. And this is a MIG welder, and you can use flux core wire through it, or you can use a gas tank like what we use here on this. So this is kind of what I'll call a gas shielded MIG machine. Now I'm going to talk about each one of these machines and what we use it for in the sense of working on cars. Now I'm not a professional welder, but this is my input from working on cars for years and years of when we use these machines and why we use these machines. So the TIG machine we use to really make pretty welds. That's basically it. If we're working on something and it's like a show piece, we want some really pretty welds on it, we use the TIG machine. Now there's two things to think about here when you use this machine. One is it's a little bit slower to use. Most people, some talented TIG welders can, TIG as fast as MIG, but for the most part, TIG welding is slower. It uses a different type of gas. It's a little bit more expensive as well. The machine is a lot more expensive to think of. And the second one though to really think about is you need a very talented welder to make really pretty welds. I've used this machine a lot of times and I'm still nowhere even close. So that's something really important to keep in mind is if you are looking to buy a TIG and you think, oh, if I buy this machine, I will get pretty welds. I'm sorry to tell you that is not the case. You have to buy this machine and put hundreds of hours of practice into it and you can get pretty welds. But that is what we use this machine for on cars. Exhausts, aluminum intake, so it can weld steel, it can weld stainless steel, it can weld aluminum, it can weld, as far as I know, every metal type. So that's a good benefit of this thing. And if you are very talented and you have a really clean surface and you have really good cuts, you can make really pretty welds for show car quality things. I'm not going to talk much about this guy because this is not really what I would advise somebody to get, but the flux core MIG welder, what we would use this for is a beginning welder. If somebody was trying to learn how to weld, but we on our cars here would never use the flux core MIG welder on this car. That's why you can see it's just hidden back here and piled of dust. The reason is when you use flux core wire, it has a lot of spatter, and that spatter goes absolutely everywhere and it sticks to every single part around it, and it looks really ugly, and you have to grind all that off if you want to clean it up or flap disc it all off. And it can only weld on steel, it cannot weld aluminum. I will say though, if you were on an extreme budget and you were doing, say, a build like this where you're doing a body swap, anything that wasn't going to be seen, you can use that and then either flap disc it off, or obviously it's not going to be seen, so don't worry about it. So sometimes spatter isn't the end of the world. I got started with one of those welders with an entry price of 50 bucks, and the flux core wire is a little bit cheaper than buying the gas and the wire for the gas shielded one. So with an entry price of that low, like say you were doing a quarter panel repair, this is a good one that I actually used a flux core. So quarter panel is the outer skin that would go right over this. So you're going to be welding along this line right here, a bunch of spot welds. You're going to be going zap, 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 zap. And if you used gas shielded, you would see welds like this that are a nice little circle, and well, a half circle because these have been ground down. On your flux core, you'd have spatter everywhere, but you could grind it all down and it would look the same as this if you used a little flap disc tool, which I don't know if you're familiar, but it's this little guy right here that you put on that. So you would hit it with your cheap welder, and then you got to go over it and clean it all up with that guy. And it could look like that, probably wouldn't, still probably have some spatter around, stuff like that. So it is a good option for a beginning level thing. It can work on steel and it's good to go on cars. Now coming over here to this machine is a Vulcan MIG Max 215 that you can get at Harbor Freight. We've had a lot of professional welders come into the shop and use this machine, and everybody has had positive reviews. They've said, I'm really surprised with how this thing welds. About once every like 3 to 4 months, Oscar's repeats, I can't believe how good this thing welds. So it's been a really, really good machine. Now, being a gas shielded MIG welder, it is pretty much the same as that one, except it doesn't have the spatter. And you can use that, that wire, this wire right here. You can buy it in stainless steel, the Weld stainless steel. We have standard steel wire right here, and that is going to work on, you know, all of our steel products, but you can also weld stainless steel with this, and you can weld aluminum with this machine as well. So anyways, if you don't know, I'll get into aluminum in a second, but anyways, if you don't know, you got your little dealie here, you hit the button, a little bit of gas comes out, a little bit of wire feeds out, and you're doing your zap and your stuff. You can, you know, YouTube MIG welding and how that works if you didn't know already. This machine, very beginner friendly. I would go as far as saying a beginning welder can get really, really good quality, good looking welds that nobody should be embarrassed about after practicing on this thing for just a few hours. So if you get your, you know, your material thickness set right and you do some test pieces, a couple test pieces and a little bit of practicing, and you should be able to do this thing. You need a good mask. For any of these welders, you should have a good mask, because being able to see where you're welding is very important. So that's not something to skimp on. And then once you have that and you can control this thing, it's extremely easy to control. You know, as you're going down your thing, you're doing your back and forths, or people do, you know, some people do circles or whatever, but it's very easy to control. And another benefit of this over TIG welding is, so when you TIG welding, you have in one hand you have your torch, and the other hand you have your rod, and you have to work those two things together, and then your foot is on a pedal as well. So you got three things all working in motion. With this guy, you got one. So say you need to make this tack right here, you just point it and zap it. Or if you have something that you need to press against something else, you can use your left hand to press two pieces together, and then your right hand to tack it. Or maybe your left hand to hold a piece right where you need it, and then your right hand to tack it. Big benefit if you're working alone. I really suggest this thing. Now, jumping into welding aluminum, like say you have intercooler piping is the most common thing for automotive welding aluminum. This thing has an attachment called a spool gun. Doesn't cost too much money. You put an aluminum spool, if this thing would open, put an aluminum spool in the back of this guy right here. Takes a little bit longer to get your settings all dialed in, but once you get your settings dialed in, this thing's really nice because you can hit hard to reach places. So when we did like a lot of the framework on our Lamborghini, the frame is aluminum, and you bet your ass we use the spool gun. Another thing that we use to a little bit of trickery for our Lamborghini SEMA car is on the top, for all the welds to be nice and pretty, we use the TIG welder. So like say we had a seam like this, we would TIG weld the seam, but then on the bottom we just came in with that spool gun and zap, 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 zapped everything that we needed to where you wouldn't see it, and it was a lot quicker. If you get your spool gun all the way dialed in, there is a little bit of spatter, but you can get really good looking welds. For instance, if you look at like say a Lamborghini frame, I point this way because my Lamborghini's like over there. If you look at a Lamborghini frame, they actually weld the Lamborghini frame with a spool gun attached to a machine like this, but it's Lamborghini, so it probably costs like 50 times more. And this machine, if you catch it not on sale, $750 without the bottle. If you catch it on sale, which you pretty much always can, you can get it for 600 bucks with a 1-year warranty. We've had this machine now for about 1.5 years, and we honestly have not had a single problem. I'm not promoting them, I'm not partnered with them, I really don't care, but it's a great machine. So I had a viewer, this car got me. So I had a viewer, Michael, ask me about, you know, kind of what welder to get started with and that type of stuff. And so my overall advice, now that we've gone through each welder, is first off is to think about your budget. If you only have about $200 to invest, I would say parking lot sale, get a flux core welder, get a $100 helmet, so spend more money on your helmet than you are going to on your welder, and some good gloves. Get to practicing, buy a lot of flap discs, and you can clean your stuff up. Let me show you what a cleaned up weld looks like, or can look like. So this corner is something I was just working on today, and it's not going to be seen on the car, so I didn't even really work on it too much. But this gap actually ran all the way up to here, and there's a huge gap through here. And if you wanted to take a little bit of time on it with a flux core, or well, any welder basically, you build it up and then you flap disc it back down, and you can see how you get, you know, a decent looking edge on there. There's some pits in there that you would come back and fill in and then flap disc down again. And but yeah, you can make a solid looking piece of metal and something that looks good, and you can't even tell really it was welded. And you could do that with a flux core or a gas shielded welder. It's just all about putting in the time and the work after the weld. So anyways, if you're on a budget, say you got like 200 bucks, that's what I would go with. Now, if you have a little bit larger budget, say you're doing like a full car rebuild and it really matters to you what your welds look like, or you're gonna be doing this a lot and it's something long term, For me, my flex core, welder kind of ran out of use after about my first 6 months to a year of working on cars because I was taking it really seriously. Jumped over into the gas shielded MIG welder. So if you got 600 bucks for the welder, another 100 bucks at least for your hood. Sometimes you might want to spend even more than that. And then you got to buy a bottle too, which is going to run you about 100 bucks. If you can afford that, it is a really, really good lifelong tool to have. That thing, I really recommend that thing. So then you can weld steel, you can weld stainless, and you can weld aluminum as well. So you can do anything on a car, and you can do really, really good looking welds once you get good with it. So if that's within your budget, like maybe you're starting up a car shop or you're like really planning on doing this stuff a lot, I think it's worth getting that type of machine. But it is worth me telling you that, we didn't get one of those until about 3 years in to doing B is for Build. We got by with the flux core, and we actually got a TIG before because I was like, all obsessed about getting these pretty welds. So that brings me to the TIG welder. We use this TIG welder more as a shelf than we do as a welder. So given its cost being a $2,000 machine, it was the worst deal out of all the 3 welders. The only reason, in my opinion, that you need to get a TIG welder like that is if you're doing show car quality stuff. If you're building a car for SEMA or somewhere else where you plan on competing and you need to have exposed welds, so you need to have like exhaust that's gonna be seen for some reason or another, or welds that are going to be seen, which honestly they're not as common on a car as what you'd think. Most welds are sanded down and then body filled over and then painted over. Anyways, we very rarely use that machine, and most of the time that we do, we could get away with using something else. So it's overall the worst bang for the buck, and it is not what I would recommend buying to use on a car. And it's also a lot of time to learn it and to get very proficient at it and to be able to weld really good welds on it. Again, I would spend that time maybe in some other category. It's just not as important. All right guys, so that's it. That's my 2 cents on welders for cars. Do not fear the flux core. If you are on a budget, it is a totally acceptable way to go. It's definitely where I started. And it's a great tool just to have for other sorts of things. You'd be so surprised when you're at home and you're like, oh, there's 2 metal things that are broken. I have a welder, and you just zap it back together. So it's a good tool to have, especially at the price point where you can find them for 50, 75 bucks sometimes on sale. It's pretty cool. So don't fear that, but if you are taking cars really seriously, moving forward, I do, suggest getting the little bigger one, but maybe you start slow, start with the flux, and then move your way up. That's my advice. All right guys, see you on the next one. Peace!